The halls of Sterling Financial were a testament to old money and ingrained tradition. They smelled of polished mahogany, expensive paper, and a faint lingering aroma of quiet arrogance. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced founders, men in starched collars whose legacies were etched into the very foundation of the company. It was a world of hushed power and unspoken rules, a world where merit was a secondary concern to pedigree. And in this world, Serena Jenkins was a ghost. At 28, she was a mid-level analyst, a title that sounded respectable but felt like a cage. Her presence in the office was a quiet hum, a steady but unacknowledged force. She was a brilliant black woman with a mind that processed numbers like poetry, but to the majority of her colleagues, she was simply a seat filler, an affirmative action hire they tolerated but never truly saw. Her desk tucked away in a corner was a model of organized chaos. Every report, every spreadsheet, and every note card meticulously arranged. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling, cluttered desks of her male colleagues who worked under the illusion of importance, while Serena did the heavy lifting. Her days were a study in silent observation. She arrived before dawn, her footsteps the only sound echoing on the pristine marble floors. She would stay long after everyone else had left the city, lights twinkling below her window, a vast, indifferent ocean to her small, isolated island. Her lunch was a ritual of solitude. She would meticulously prepare a healthy meal from home, a simple salad with fresh vegetables, a piece of grilled chicken, and eat it at her desk. She did this not out of a lack of options, but out of a habit born of exclusion. She had long ago stopped trying to join the boisterous groups of colleagues who went out to expensive restaurants, their laughter a distant alien sound that she had learned to tune out. She knew her place, or at least the place they had assigned her. The omniscient narrative, however, could see beyond the polished facade of Sterling Financial and into the very heart of its decay. The company was a ship with a beautiful exterior but a rotting hull. Years of mismanagement, of nepotism over talent, and of an old guard too comfortable in their gilded chairs, had left the company on the brink of financial collapse. The board, a group of old money conservatives who were now in a state of quiet panic, had initiated a desperate top-secret plan. They had decided to bring in a new young CEO, an outsider with no ties to the old guard, to perform a radical overhaul and save their sinking ship. Unbeknownst to anyone, least of all the employees, a new era was about to begin, and the ghosts of Sterling Financial were about to be seen. Arthur Caldwell was one of those ghosts, though he would never see it that way. As Serena's manager, he was a walking caricature of inherited privilege. In his early 40s, he was balding and paunchy, a man who saw his position as a birthright rather than a responsibility. He was loud where Serena was quiet, sloppy where she was meticulous, and arrogant where she was humble. He saw Serena as a convenient tool, an efficient worker bee he could delegate to, while he spent his days on lavish lunches and long phone calls about his golf game. One blustery Tuesday afternoon, an inexperienced intern named Mark made a critical error. He had been tasked with creating a preliminary report on a major new investment, and a miscalculation in his data model threatened to derail the entire project. Mark, a young man fresh out of college, was on the verge of being fired, his face pale with terror. Arthur, smelling weakness, was about to make a public example of him. But as the omniscient narrator could see, Serena was already at work. She had noticed Mark's frantic keystrokes and the look of panic on his face. Without saying a word to anyone, she stayed late, quietly correcting the complex miscalculation and rerunning the entire report. The next morning, she simply placed the corrected report on Mark's desk. "Just be more careful next time," she said softly, her voice devoid of judgment. She asked for no credit, no praise, nothing. This quiet act of grace, this save-the-cat moment, revealed the deep well of character that lay beneath her silent exterior. It was an act of kindness, a testament to her belief that people, even those who made mistakes, deserved a chance. Yet, this wasn't the only secret Serena held. While her colleagues saw her as a mid-level analyst, the truth was far more complex. The narrator reveals that Serena held an MBA from a top-tier university, a fact she had meticulously kept hidden. She had chosen to enter the company at a lower level to observe, to learn, and to understand the company's internal machinery from the ground up. She wasn't just a worker, she was a student of the system, a quiet architect of a different future. She spent her nights at home not just with her own work, but with a deeply personal project, a detailed analysis of Sterling Financial's structural inefficiencies and deep-seated cultural biases. She was building a blueprint for its future, a future built on merit, not on privilege. Arthur Caldwell, meanwhile, was completely oblivious. He saw Serena's quiet efficiency as a sign of her subservience, a confirmation of his own superiority. His world was a bubble of inherited power, and he was about to get a rude awakening. The board had already made their final decision, and the new CEO was already on their flight path. The clock was ticking on the old guard, and Arthur, in his blissful ignorance, was about to start a chain of events that would lead to his own spectacular downfall, all because he couldn't see the woman right in front of him. The air in Sterling Financial was always a carefully controlled temperature, but on this particular Thursday, it felt thick and heavy, charged with a nervous energy that hummed just beneath the surface. For Serena, it was the day of the quarterly presentation, a high-stakes company-wide event where managers were meant to showcase their team's successes. For Arthur Caldwell, it was a stage for his performance, his preening, and his carefully orchestrated displays of power. The boardroom was a cavern of dark wood and polished glass. Arthur, his tie loosened just so, stood at the head of the long table, a smug smile on his face. The entire department was present, including Serena, who sat quietly at the end of the table, her report neatly organized in a folder. She had done the bulk of the work, as always, meticulously compiling the data and creating the projections that would be the cornerstone of his presentation. Arthur began to speak, his voice booming with a confidence he hadn't earned. He went through the slides with a practiced ease, taking all the credit for the team's successes. The omniscient narrative, however, could see the truth. His presentation was a patchwork of Serena's genius and his own vague, uninspired platitudes. He was a fraud, and everyone in the room, from the senior vice presidents to the junior analysts, knew it, but no one dared to speak. Then he paused, a malevolent glint in his eye. He was about to perform his favorite act, public humiliation. He gestured to a slide that showed a minor, irrelevant detail, something he had tasked Serena with just 2 days ago, knowing it was an impossible task to complete accurately in such a short amount of time. He turned to her, his smile a thin, cruel line. "Serena," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "could you please explain this discrepancy for the room?" Serena's heart sank. She knew this was a trap. He hadn't given her enough time to complete the detailed analysis he was now pointing to. She had been working on it non-stop, but it was still a rough draft. The old Serena. The quiet, resigned Serena would have apologized, taken the blame, and retreated. But the new Serena, the one who had felt the stirrings of a long-dormant fire, felt a different urge. She felt the urge to fight. "I was given the task 2 days ago, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I have a detailed report ready, but as you know, that kind of analysis takes time." The room held its breath. No one had ever spoken back to Arthur. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Time. What time? You've had plenty of time to work on it, haven't you? I gave you the chance, after all." He then gestured vaguely at her, his tone laced with a thinly veiled racism that made everyone in the room cringe. "I believe in giving everyone a chance, of course, but some people just don't have the work ethic, do they?" The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a direct attack on her dignity, on her very worth. The humiliation was a familiar sting, but this time it was a different kind of pain. It wasn't a pinprick. It was a wound. It was a confirmation of everything she had suspected, every quiet insult, every ignored achievement. He wasn't just belittling her work. He was belittling her very existence. A part of her wanted to scream, to lash out, to tell him he was a fool, a fraud, a racist. But the other part, the part that had been trained in a lifetime of institutionalized racism, told her to be quiet, to endure, to not give them the angry black woman stereotype they were so desperate to pin on her. But this was different. This wasn't just a minor insult. It was a line in the sand. He was telling her in front of her colleagues that she was worthless. He was confirming his belief that her accomplishments were nothing more than a gift from his white charity. This wasn't just about a report. It was about the profound injustice of his words, of his attitude, and of the entire system that allowed men like him to thrive, while people like her were kept in the shadows. He walked over to her, his face inches from hers, a triumphant smirk on his lips. He slammed a small cardboard box onto her desk, the contents rattling. "I'm sorry, Serena," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "but we're going to have to let you go. You're just not a good fit here." He then leaned in, and in a low whisper meant only for her ears said the words that would be the final blow. "You've had your chance. Go back to where you came from." The words hit her like a physical blow. Go back to where you came from. The classic hateful microaggression delivered with the casual cruelty of a man who believed he was doing nothing wrong. As she stood up, her hands trembling, she looked at the faces of her colleagues. They all looked away, a collective act of cowardice that was as painful as Arthur's words. They were all complicit. As she walked out of the office, the box of her belongings in her arms, she felt a profound sense of defeat. The city lights outside, once a symbol of opportunity, now looked like a cold, indifferent sea. But then, as she stood alone in the hallway, an image flashed in her mind, Arthur's smug, triumphant face, and a quiet, burning resolve settled over her. This wasn't the end. This was the point of no return. The old Serena, the one who would have quietly found another job and tried to forget, was gone. The new Serena, the one who had been awakened by his casual cruelty, was now in control. She wasn't just going to get a new job. She was going to fight back. She was going to use her hidden talent, her secret project, and her unyielding resolve to take down the very system that had tried to break her. As she walked out of the glass doors of Sterling Financial, she made a silent vow. She would not let this injustice stand. She would not go back to her life as a quiet, overlooked employee. The injustice was too great. The city, with its indifferent hum, swallowed Serena whole. The weight of the cardboard box in her arms felt heavy, not with the meager possessions it contained, but with the profound injustice of her dismissal. She stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind whipping around her, a solitary figure in a sea of hurried commuters. The familiar ache of being overlooked had been replaced by a sharper, more painful sting of outright rejection. Arthur's final words echoed in her mind, a venomous whisper. "Go back to where you came from, aim." But as the initial sting of humiliation faded, something new began to stir. It was a cold, hard resolve, a quiet, fierce determination that had been awakened by his casual cruelty. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, and made a decision. She would not let this be the end of her story. This was not a defeat. It was a catalyst. She took a cab across town to a quiet, unassuming brownstone. It was the home of Eleanor Vance, a retired executive who had once been a pioneering woman in a male-dominated industry. Eleanor was a force of nature, sharp, observant, and with a network of powerful connections that stretched across the globe. She had been a mentor to Serena for years, a quiet champion who saw the fire and brilliance that others at Sterling Financial had so conveniently ignored. Eleanor opened the door, her face a mask of concern. She had heard the whispers, the rumors of the public dressing down. When Serena, a woman who rarely showed her emotions, walked in with the box of her belongings and a look of steel in her eyes, Eleanor knew something had fundamentally shifted. "He fired me," Serena said, simply placing the box on a small side table. "He said I didn't have the work ethic, and then he told me to go back to where I came from." Eleanor's face hardened. She knew the code, the subtle language of institutionalized racism that Arthur had so brazenly used. She listened as Serena recounted the story, her voice calm and controlled, but her eyes burning with a righteous fury. And then, for the first time, Serena revealed her secret. "I have a project," she said, her voice dropping to a low whisper. "I've been working on it for years. A complete analysis of Sterling Financial. Not just their financial weaknesses, but their structural weaknesses. Their old guard mentality, their outdated technology, their culture of nepotism and complacency. I have a detailed plan to save them, to completely overhaul the company and bring it into the 21st century. I have the data, the projections, everything." Eleanor stared at her, stunned. She had always known Serena was brilliant, but this level of foresight and planning, this audacious act of quiet rebellion, was breathtaking. "You have a top-tier MBA, and you've been working as a mid-level analyst all this time," she asked, a mix of awe and frustration in her voice. "Serena, why?" "Because I needed to see it from the inside," Serena replied. "I needed to understand the machine before I could fix it." Meanwhile, the omniscient narrative, ever present, shifted its focus back to Sterling Financial. The board, a cabal of old money men who were now in a state of quiet panic, had gathered for a top-secret meeting. They had seen the numbers, and they knew the company was on the brink of collapse. They had to act now. They had initiated a desperate search for a new CEO, a visionary leader who could save them from their own complacency. The candidates they had been considering were all men, all from a similar mold, but none of them had the radical outside-the-box thinking they needed. A board member, a pragmatic man named Mr. Thompson, looked at the list of candidates with a sigh of frustration. "We're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, gentlemen," he said, his voice grim. "We need a revolutionary, not another caretaker." It was then that Eleanor Vance, using her formidable network, made a call. She didn't recommend Serena. She presented her findings, her project, her plan. She sent an anonymous encrypted file to the board detailing not only the company's weaknesses, but Serena's radical data-driven solutions. The board, initially skeptical, was blown away. The plan was audacious, brilliant, and most importantly, it was the only thing that could save them. Hours later, as Arthur Caldwell was celebrating his victory over Serena at a lavish lunch with his sycophants, the board announced their decision. A press release was sent out, and a hush fell over the financial world. The new CEO of Sterling Financial was an outsider, a woman from a rival firm who had come highly recommended. Her name was Serena Jenkins. The moment was a pinnacle of dramatic irony. As Arthur regaled his friends with a condescending, racist version of the story of how he had put Serena in her place, the news was already spreading like wildfire. His phone buzzed with notifications, but he ignored them, basking in his moment of cruel, fleeting triumph. He had no idea that the woman he had just publicly humiliated and fired was now his boss. He had no idea that the ghost he had tried to erase was now the captain of his ship. When he finally received a frantic call from a horrified colleague, the news hit him like a physical blow. The new CEO wasn't some woman from a rival firm, it was Serena. His triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound disbelief and terror. The walls of his privileged world were beginning to crumble, and he was about to face a truth more terrifying than any he could have imagined. The game had just changed, and the one person he had never seen was about to show him exactly who she was. The news ripped through the polished halls of Sterling Financial like a shockwave. Arthur Caldwell's triumphant celebratory lunch turned into a panic-stricken scramble back to the office. The serene, air-conditioned environment of the firm felt suddenly suffocating, the hushed whispers now a frantic, buzzing hum of disbelief. The new CEO was Serena Jenkins, the quiet, overlooked analyst he had just publicly humiliated and fired. The woman he had told to go back to where she came from. Arthur's mind, once a fortress of privilege and entitlement, was now in a state of siege. He couldn't process it. It was a mistake, a grotesque, impossible joke. How could a woman like her, a woman he had so comfortably and casually disdained for years, rise to a position of power above him? His reality, a reality built on the unwavering belief in his own superiority, was crumbling before his very eyes. The omniscient narrator could see into his mind. The fear was a cold, bitter taste, and it was quickly being replaced by a seething, desperate rage. He wasn't just a victim of a cruel twist of fate. He was a man who had been wronged. This wasn't justice. It was an insult to his very existence. He spent the rest of the day in a frenzied state, frantically calling his friends on the board, only to be met with cold, evasive answers. He was a sinking ship, and the rats were abandoning him. He knew he had one last play. He would not go down without a fight. He would storm the castle, demand an audience, and through sheer force of will and intimidation, he would restore his rightful place in the world. He would remind Serena who she was and who he was. The confrontation was set for the following morning. Arthur, a man who had always used the boardroom as his stage for public performances, now chose it as his arena for a final, desperate battle. The symbolism was not lost on the omniscient narrator. This was the very room where he had berated employees, where he had made Serena feel small, and where he was now about to face his own reckoning. Serena arrived early, her stride purposeful, her expression calm and composed. She was not the same woman who had carried a box of her belongings out of the office just days before. The quiet fire that had been smoldering inside her was now a steady, controlled flame. She was not here for revenge. She was here for justice. She was here to dismantle a corrupt system and rebuild it with integrity. Arthur, on the other hand, arrived with a frenetic energy, a storm of panic and rage barely contained beneath a facade of bluster. He burst into the boardroom where Serena was calmly organizing her papers. The board members, a mix of skeptical old guard and new pragmatic members, watched the scene unfold with a nervous silence. "You can't be serious," Arthur said, his voice a low, threatening growl. He pointed a shaking finger at her. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over? You think I'm going to let you get away with this? You stole confidential information. Your work here was a joke. I have proof." He slammed a folder onto the table. It was a pathetic last-ditch effort, a collection of fabricated claims, half-truths, and manipulated data points, all designed to cast doubt on her competence. The board members, who had seen his arrogance for years, looked at him with a mix of pity and disgust. They had already seen the truth in Serena's plan. They knew he was just trying to create chaos to hang on by a single hair. Serena, however, did not flinch. She simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "Sit down, Arthur," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "You are no longer an employee of this company. You have no authority here." But Arthur was beyond reason. He was a cornered animal. "I demand a full review," he shouted, his face red with fury. "I demand you justify your appointment in front of the board now." The board chairman, a weary old man named Mr. Thompson, sighed. He looked at Serena, a silent question in his eyes. Elias had to face this alone. This was his gauntlet. He had to prove her worth, not just with her business plan, but with her character. "Very well," Serena said, her voice still calm. "Let's begin." The clock on the wall, the same clock that had witnessed so many of Arthur's power plays, now became a symbol of his impending downfall. The entire room, once a stage for his grandstanding, was now the arena for his final test. He had an hour to dismantle her reputation, to cast doubt on her integrity. He was a single man against a truth that was unbeknownst to him already on the side of his opponent. The weight of his own arrogance, his own incompetence, and his own ingrained prejudice was about to come crashing down on him. The hero was alone, but she was not defenseless. Her weapon was the truth, and it was a weapon forged in the very fires of his own cruelty. The clock on the boardroom wall began its measured tick. To Arthur, it was the sound of opportunity, a countdown to his vindication. To the board members, it was the sound of a looming crisis. To Serena, it was the sound of justice, a metronome for the truth she was about to lay bare. Arthur, emboldened by the silent audience, began his final desperate gambit. "I'm not here to talk about business, gentlemen." He sneered, his gaze sweeping over the board members, a pathetic attempt to regain his lost authority. "I'm here to talk about character. The character of this woman you've so blindly appointed." He waved his hand dismissively at Serena. Serena Jenkins. She was an employee of mine, a mediocre one at that. I have here a folder full of her incompetence, of her missed deadlines, of her, well, let's just say her work ethic. He opened the folder, pulling out a series of manipulated reports and out-of-context emails. He was a master of the half-truth, a professional manipulator who knew how to twist reality to fit his narrative. He began to paint a picture of a lazy, incompetent employee who had stolen company data, and now, through some backroom deal, had been given a position she didn't deserve. The old guard on the boardmen, who had known and respected Arthur's family for decades, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They had a deep-seated distrust of outsiders of change. They wanted to believe him. They wanted to believe that the world they had built was still in control. But Serena, calm and composed, let him speak. She let him exhaust his lies, a final, pitiful performance. When he was done, panting and red-faced with a manic triumph, she simply looked at him and said, "Are you finished, Arthur?" Her voice was quiet, but it was a quiet that commanded attention. It was a stillness that was more powerful than his storm. She then walked over to the presentation screen and with a few clicks brought up a new display. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a timeline of Arthur's tenure at Sterling Financial. She began to speak not with anger, but with facts. She showed them the cost of his nepotism, the millions lost due to his mismanagement, the countless opportunities he had squandered due to his own incompetence. She had been observing him for years, and now she was exposing him not with emotion, but with the cold, hard logic of data. "You claim I was a mediocre employee," she said, her voice still calm. "But my performance reviews, which you conveniently forgot to mention, tell a different story." And while you were at your lavish lunches, I was fixing the mistakes of others' mistakes that cost this company millions of dollars." She then showed them the corrected report for the intern, a small act of kindness that now served as a powerful piece of evidence against Arthur's cruelty. Arthur, his face now pale with fear, tried to interrupt. "You have no proof," he shouted. "This is a lie. She's making it all up." Serena's eyes, a fire of quiet fury, finally locked with his. "Proof," she said, a single word that hung in the air. "I have all the proof I need." She then brought up a final slide. It was a small, unassuming audio file. "This is a recording of our last conversation, Arthur. A conversation I recorded after you fired me." The board members gasped. Arthur's face went white. He knew what was on that recording. He lunged for the computer, a desperate final attempt to silence her, to stop the truth from coming out. For a split second, it seemed he might succeed, that his violence would win out over her poise. But a security guard positioned just outside the door, and acting on Serena's preemptive orders, walked in and calmly intercepted him. The moment of chaos passed as quickly as it had come. The boardroom was silent as Serena pressed a button, and then the room was filled with the sound of Arthur's voice, his pompous, arrogant tone, his condescending laughter, and his final venomous whisper. "Go back to where you came from." The silence that followed was deafening. The board members who had once held Arthur in a certain amount of regard now looked at him with a mix of disgust and shame. The old guard realized the depth of their own complicity, their own negligence in allowing a man like this to hold a position of power for so long. The new blood members who had been skeptical of her appointment now looked at Serena with a profound, dawning awe. She was not just brilliant. She was a leader of unshakable character. The chairman of the board, a man who had initially been the most resistant to her appointment, was the first to speak. His voice was thick with emotion. "Miss Jenkins, there is no need for further discussion. Mr. Caldwell is not only terminated, but we will be pursuing legal action against him for his misconduct." He then turned to Serena, his eyes filled with a newfound respect. "You have not only proven your competence, but you have shown us what true leadership looks like. Welcome to Sterling Financial, Madam CEO." A slow, single clap began. It was from the young intern, Mark, who had been listening to the entire meeting from a side office. His clap was soon joined by others. The board members, one by one, rose to their feet, their applause a thunderous declaration of her victory. The truth of her resilience, her dignity, and her brilliance was finally and irrevocably recognized. The quiet, overlooked analyst was now the undisputed leader of a company she had, in a single, masterful act, saved from itself. The applause died down, but the silence that followed was no longer a sign of tension. It was a silence of reverence, of profound respect. Arthur Caldwell, the man who had built his life on the shifting sands of privilege and prejudice, was led out of the boardroom by 2 security guards, his face a mask of disbelief and utter defeat. The world he had so confidently inhabited had evaporated in a single devastating moment. He was not just fired, he was disgraced. The legal actions, the public shaming, the destruction of his reputation, the fall, was total, a just and complete retribution for a lifetime of casual cruelty. He had been a predator, and now he was nothing. The board meeting, which had started as a chaotic confrontation, ended as a solemn ceremony. One by one, the board members, even the most skeptical old guard figures, approached Serena, their faces etched with a mixture of apology and awe. Mr. Thompson, the chairman, shook her hand with a firm, respectful grip. "We were blind," he admitted, his voice low with shame. "We let our prejudices get in the way of what was right. You have shown us the way forward, Miss Jenkins." This quiet act of contrition, this public acknowledgement of their own complicity, was a crucial part of the resolution. It wasn't just about Arthur's punishment, it was about the company's redemption. The old ways were not just being replaced, they were being acknowledged and repented for. The institutionalized racism and the casual bigotry that had defined Sterling Financial for decades were finally being dismantled from the inside out. Serena, now the undisputed leader, immediately began her corporate overhaul. The first to be called into her office was Mark, the young intern she had saved. He walked in, his face pale and nervous, expecting a lecture. Instead, she offered him a promotion. "Your work is exceptional, Mark," she said, a warm smile on her face. "You have a bright future here. A future where merit, not connections, is all that matters." His promotion was her first act of justice, a symbol of the new meritocracy she was building. The company was a whirlwind of change. Outdated departments were streamlined, new technologies were implemented, and most importantly, a new culture was born. Serena instituted mandatory diversity and inclusion training, but she did it not with an iron fist, but with a compassionate, firm resolve. She offered the entire company a chance to change, to learn, and to grow. She was a leader, not a dictator, and her strength lay not in her power, but in her dignity. The Type B antagonist, a skeptical board member named Richard Miller, a man who had initially voted against her appointment, came to her office late one afternoon. He was a man of old money and deep-seated, though not malicious prejudices. "Serena," he said, his voice hesitant, I was wrong. About you. About a lot of things. I've lived in this bubble for so long I didn't even see the injustice, the quiet suffering that was happening right under our noses." He then did something that was almost unthinkable for a man of his stature. "I am truly sorry," he said, a look of genuine remorse on his face. He became her quiet, staunchest ally on the board, his repentance a testament to her profound impact. Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow on the now bustling office, Serena sat in her new corner office. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling panorama of the city lights that had once seemed so indifferent. A knock on the door, and in walked Eleanor Vance, her mentor and friend. Eleanor poured them both a glass of water, a simple gesture that spoke of a deep, abiding respect. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, simply taking in the view, the weight of the day's events settling over them. "You did it, Serena." Eleanor said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "You saved the company. You got justice for yourself. You proved them all wrong." Serena smiled, a small, weary but deeply contented smile. She looked at the city, at the lights, at the people moving below her, all of them a part of a world that she now had a hand in shaping. It was never about getting even. She said the words echoing softly in the vast room. It was about getting what I deserved, and making sure that no one else has to go through what I did. The conversation was short, a brief moment of quiet reflection before the hard work of rebuilding truly began. But it was a conversation that was a perfect, peaceful resolution to a long and arduous journey. She was no longer just an analyst. She was a CEO, a visionary, and a leader who had proven that true power was not in the position you held, but in the character you brought to it. The ghost of Sterling Financial was gone, replaced by a woman who was more real, more brilliant, and more powerful than anyone had ever given her credit for. 2 years later, the change in Sterling Financial was more than just a new CEO. It was a complete and total metamorphosis. Under Serena Jenkins's visionary leadership, the company had not only averted financial disaster, but had soared to new heights. The once stuffy old money firm was now a model of modern corporate success, a company that was not only profitable but was also a beacon of progressive values. The headquarters, once a mausoleum of tradition, now hummed with a diverse, vibrant energy. The employees, from the mailroom clerks to the senior vice presidents, were all united by a shared sense of purpose and a belief in the company's new meritocratic culture. Serena, now an icon in the financial world, was a different woman. The quiet, guarded demeanor that had once defined her had been replaced by a confident, authoritative presence. She was still humble, still deeply empathetic, but the years of fighting had forged her into a leader of unshakable resolve. She was no longer a ghost in the halls. She was the heartbeat of the company. She had created a workplace where talent was nurtured, where hard work was rewarded, and where people of all backgrounds had an equal opportunity to succeed. Mark, the young intern she had saved, was now a senior analyst, a testament to her belief in giving people a chance. Richard Miller, the skeptical board member, had become her staunchest ally, often speaking publicly about the need for corporate change and the importance of hiring for character over pedigree. But Serena's legacy extended far beyond the walls of Sterling Financial. She had never forgotten the quiet dignity and resilience of her own past, and she had used her newfound power to ensure that others would not have to endure the same struggles she had. She founded the Jenkins Initiative, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to mentoring and providing scholarships for young minority students interested in finance. The foundation was her way of paying it forward, of creating a pipeline of talent that would one day change the face of the industry for good. She was not just building a company, she was building a better future, one student at a time. The young people she mentored saw her not as a distant figure of power, but as a guiding light, a living testament to the fact that hard work and unyielding dignity could and would triumph over all. The story of Arthur Caldwell, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale. He had not only been fired and disgraced, but he had also faced legal repercussions for his misconduct. His reputation was in tatters, his social circle had abandoned him, and the life of privilege he had once taken for granted was gone. He was now a ghost. In a world he had once ruled, a man who had lost everything because of his own arrogance and bigotry. The irony was a delicious final dose of justice. The echo of his privilege, which had once seemed so powerful, had faded into a whisper of shame. The story culminates on a quiet, symbolic image. It is a beautiful, sunny afternoon, and Serena is in her office, her gaze sweeping over the breathtaking city skyline. Her phone rings. It is Eleanor Vance, her mentor, her friend, her unwavering champion. They talk not about business, but about life, about how far they've come. As they talk, Serena's eyes fall on a small, framed photograph on her desk. It is a picture of her younger self, a quiet, serious young woman, with a flicker of defiance in her eyes, sitting alone at her desk. She looks at the picture, then out at the city, a city she had once felt so small, in a city she now helped to run. She smiles, a soft, contented expression that reaches her eyes. The old pain is not gone, but it has been transformed into a source of immense strength. The ghost of her past has been replaced by a vibrant, powerful future. She is no longer the overlooked employee. She is the visionary leader. She is no longer just a woman who endured. She is a woman who thrived. She is no longer just a story of survival. She is a legend of hope, a powerful living testament to the fact that character, integrity, and unyielding justice are the only things that truly matter. The echo of privilege has been replaced by the roar of justice, and it is a roar that will resonate for generations to come. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.